The title of this episode is Joy, Anger and Despair, and it really does just boggle the mind about the massive news stories that have happened in the first 7 days of 2021. But when you look at the events that have happened in Washington, particularly yesterday, it can be easy to think, well, what can we do? What can I do to stop that? And do we take it for granted that the norms of society will just carry on? What we're saying to you is that no matter who you are, no matter what experience you've got, you can make a difference. Go out there and start campaigning. It doesn't matter if you don't have lots of money, lots of manpower, or a decade worth of council experience. You can make that difference. It will start off with helping just maybe a single person, and then helping out a street, and then maybe a ward, then a town, a city, and eventually, if enough of us do it, a country. We need to be the change we want to see, and I hope all of you listening to this will start that change. Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Hello, welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. I'm John Potter, your host, and joining me today are three of our regular panellists. First up, we have the Deputy Leader of the Stockport Lib Dems and also our valiant candidate in Hazel Grove for the last few general elections is Lisa Smart. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. The world has gone a little bit bonkers. Just when we thought it couldn't get more bonkers, it really has. And next up, also from Stockport, they have got not quite a majority, both in this podcast and in real life. We have Tom Morrison. Hi, Tom.
Hey, John. Apologies for my look. I was up all night watching CNN last night, so I look like death at the moment.
Yes, but for the John King battle wall, it's always worth it. Although the battle wall took a different meaning last night as well. And finally, we have Laura Gordon joining from Yorkshire, from Sheffield. She was the candidate in Sheffield Hallam in the last election, narrowly missing out. Welcome, Laura.
Welcome. Happy New Year.
Yes, and it is a new year. While this is our second podcast of the year, this is our first main news podcast, and we've got loads to talk about. We've got the Georgia Senate elections, we've got the disruption in Washington last night, which was seemingly utterly crazy. It was already going to be bonkers in Washington with 100 congressmen deciding they would vote against the result of an election. Discuss that. And then we've got all the goings on in this country with COVID, schools, exams, lockdowns, what's going to happen with elections. So they're just some of the topics we're going to talk about today. And we'll probably go off in tangents because that's what we do. And Laura will rant about something, because that's what she does. So we'll start off with the good news, which is Georgia. And Lisa, I think, I'll be honest, I didn't think the Democrats would win Georgia. I thought that was going to be a tough gain for them to gain those 2 Senate seats. But they did. And now the Senate is completely imbalanced 50-50.
Yeah, so it comes down to the votes of Kamala Harris, the first ever woman to be Vice President of the United States. And people might be thinking, why are we talking about US elections? Why do we not give this much importance in our pod to, German elections or Danish elections or what have you? And it's simply because what happens in the States has such wide-ranging impact to every single other country in the whole of the world. And it's also, we try and we also do sometimes manage to draw successful parallels between the way some things work in the States and some effective campaigning and the way things work over here. But I was really pleased to see the 2 senators being returned from Georgia being Democrats. I think there were interesting stories to both of them. So John Ossoff, who is a Jewish person, and Raphael Warnock, who is the first Black Democrat to be elected in the state of Georgia. He was a pastor in the church where Martin Luther King used to preach. He was John Lewis's pastor, and he was also his intern. So there's some lovely storytelling there, which helps to really illustrate the point. It does mean that Joe Biden will be able to get more things through than had the Senate stayed in Republican control. I think for me, having listened to some of the people involved in the campaign speaking in the media yesterday, really clear, we know this, right? But it's good to hear people who've just won an election say it. The reason they won is because they organised, and we talked about Stacey Abrams on this podcast on a previous episode of the podcast, and about the importance of getting people registered and getting them to vote. And the work that has been going on for years, this isn't something that's just been in the short campaign that's just been in the last few weeks. This is a years-long campaign to get communities registered and out to vote, and you do that by organising. And the people who have done that, and I was listening particularly to some of the women who had done that, were utterly inspirational. And a quote that made me just pause briefly it was a Stacey Abrams quote. It was, "I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I am determined." And I thought that was absolutely bang on the money.
And you will be disappointed to know that T-shirts with that on are not currently available, because I did look.
Well, that's an opportunity for the Lib Dem pod to get into Stacey Abrams.
There is a marketing
T-shirt
opportunity.
Yeah, and it is. And
there is an opportunity.
Even after that victory, I mean, Stacey Abrams already said, "Look, they can't," because it was actually fairly narrow. Let's not beat about. There was within a percentage point or two of them, of the Republicans still holding on to those seats. But Stacey Abrams said, "Look, we've got 2 years to take that governorship," and what she came so close to. And it's this idea that you just can't stop. And Tom, I suppose, and you said you've been tired, but that was when all the chaos was happening in Washington yesterday. Right in the middle of it, you heard that Jon Ossoff had been elected as the second senator in that race, and it was a brilliant moment for that to happen. And he's also the youngest senator to be elected since Joe Biden. So he's 33, and so Joe Biden has been running for president for longer than Jon Ossoff has been alive. So it's just an incredible story, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, it is, and I think that's quite interesting, isn't it? Where you had anarchy, kind of that's happening in Washington, stoked by social media, let's be honest. And then during this kind of chaos, which is actually what we saw in Washington, is very reminiscent and very kind of similar to the chaos that you see online on Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And then in between that, actually, the Democrats were winning a really vital and important election. And I think is the right word? Is there a parable there? Or, we can get obsessed with what's online, and we can get obsessed with the battles and arguing with people on Twitter, but actually organizing and winning elections is more important. And that was the one highlight of yesterday. Yesterday started so well, didn't it? It started so well, and it ended with just the worst. But I was so happy to see. I was like you, John. I didn't think the Democrats were going to win Georgia, and the tweet I saw was someone saying, "Could the Democrats come and organise the vaccine rollout, because they seem to be good at organising stuff?" So that was spot on.
Just the Georgia ones.
yeah, just the Georgia Democrats. Yeah.
And for all those.
I agree. It just has such a sort of pleasing moral of the story. Really, it's it is the hard work pays off. And I think the other thing that has been nice is just seeing everybody really celebrating the work of Stacey Abrams, because, so often you'll have somebody who does all of this work behind the scenes, and we all know that they're the person who really gets it done. And the candidate is the person who's a bit showy. And I used to describe myself as the candidate as the animated cardboard cutout. Actually, it's a person in the office who's doing all the work, and the candidate's just the kind of face of it. It's so nice to see that work being celebrated and the credit going where it's due. And especially when those people in the back office are women, and especially when they're women of color, then that often doesn't happen. So it is just really nice, not only to see the kind of hard work pays off, which is always a nice moral of the story, but also that actually the people are really getting the credit where it's deserved. And I guess we'll see what happens if they take that forward into the next governorship. But I think it'll also be interesting in terms of whether the approach that Stacey Abrams has pioneered in Georgia will be something that the Democrats take into other states and other areas. Because it's not just that Raphael Warnock is the first Black senator in Georgia. I think he was the first Black Democratic senator to be elected in a former Confederate state since Reconstruction. So, that's a phenomenal achievement. When he was born, the two Georgia senators were segregationists. It's a massive change. And then you think, well, is this something that is possible in South Carolina? Is it possible in North Carolina? Is it, could it be something that could underpin a sort of fundamental realignment in American politics, which I think would then have an awful lot of lessons for campaigners in other parts of the world.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Pray to Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Pray to Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Pray to Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Pray to Reigns website at praytoreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roasted coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. Here's a question, because obviously they were lucky to get the runoff election anyway. They only narrowly missed, particularly Perdue, the Republican incumbent, only just missed out on winning that seat in November. But did the Democrats win it? And like I said, this is not taken away from all the hard work. Or was it the fact that Trump was so stupid in his campaigning to go around and telling your supporters don't trust in elections and then surprising when they don't then turn out? How much was this just Trump and the Republicans being stupid?
So I think something we've said, I think on the podcast before, is that, you have to do the work and you have to be a bit lucky sometimes. And you do the work and that's what lines you up so that when things align, you're able to take advantage of it. And sometimes you do the work and it doesn't pay off because you get bad luck. But actually, if you don't do the work, you're not going to be in a position to take advantage of the luck when it comes your way.
Yeah,
I think
there's a lovely anecdote that I can't remember and can't do justice, but the punchline of it is, the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get.
Yeah. Or I was going to go for the cricket one, and I can't remember what it says. Cricket is 90% luck and 10% skill, but you won't get any luck unless you have some of the skill. And I think that's the kind of we're all in kind of agreement that actually the Democrats earned the right to win that by the effort they put in.
But I think it was the lesson from the US general election as well, wasn't it? I think we discussed this in the last pod that if it wasn't for COVID, Trump probably, Trump was more likely to have won. But it's because the Democrats were so good at getting organized and building up their workforce, their volunteer force, that they were able to capitalize on the Republicans making a mistake. And actually that's a big lesson for any political organization, is that you need to be agile and quick enough to jump on any mistake from your opponent and use that to grab the ball and get it to the end zone.
And as a parallel for Lib Dems, because this is the Lib Dem pod, I saw a photo from a voter in Georgia of their carpet covered in leaflets from the Democrats.
Yeah, I saw that.
And somebody had said, these poor people must know what it feels like to live in a seat where the Lib Dems are fighting a by-election. And there was a real range of really interesting literature. And it wasn't won on Twitter, this election. It was won by campaigning on the ground, including by putting bits of paper through people's doors.
I showed you what a geek I am. As soon as I saw that picture, and there must have been about a dozen to 50 leaflets, I thought, oh, I'd really like to see the designs of those leaflets. That was the first thing that came to my head. And the deliverer's done really well. There's not a single crease line from that letterbox. They've really put the effort in. But that is obviously the good bit. We can't go any further without talking about what then happened in Washington. And actually, the depressing thing, I was depressed about what was going to happen with that vote anyway, because let's not forget, even before the incident happened in Washington yesterday, over 100 congressmen and a dozen senators were willing to vote to not accept the result of that election. And we had Richard talked about in our review of the year, said about, was that the high mark for populism? And Richard thought it was. There's still a dangerous amount of people who were, just to reject it. And Mitch McConnell came out, the Republicans, was the Republican majority leader in the Senate. But these people have enabled this to go on for a long time. And so it was depressing. And then after the event, 6 of those senators stopped and decided they wouldn't contest it. But there were still people contesting Wisconsin and things like that. So what is yesterday's rioting mean? Is it the start of something or is it the end of something, Tom?
I don't think we're at the start, and I don't think we're at the end. I think this is a natural progression of what we're seeing at the progression of politics that we've seen going forth. Now, let's not forget, we've had our own, in Britain, we've had our own instances of political terrorism, most notably in the EU referendum, where Jo Cox sadly lost her life. And I think there are two things here for me. Firstly, I think it is just proof that if you are in politics, you have a responsibility to not kind of bay the mob, so to speak. And that's what Trump did yesterday wasn't politics, and what his team did wasn't politics. It wasn't politics. And then the second thing on that,
let's be honest, it was a coup attempt.
Sorry. Well, yeah.
It was a coup attempt. It wasn't a very successful coup attempt. It wasn't a very good coup attempt. It wasn't one that was likely to succeed, but it was still a coup attempt.
But I think the most important thing for me is that there is it goes back to my first point. There is an absolute responsibility from anyone working in politics. If you are either a candidate or you're a campaigner, you have a responsibility to first of all, to use fact and not fiction. And secondly, I think you have a responsibility to keep calm and keep your supporters calm. Now, we can all be energized about an issue. Now, we can be energized about Brexit, for instance, or we can be energized about school funding. But when you start stoking fire and using rhetoric such as us and them, and start deliberately deceiving people and playing upon their prejudices, then you should not be in politics and you should not be involved in any kind of campaigning. And yesterday, I think that there is the thing that came out straight away for me is that, there was talk about impeachment and there was talk about the 25th Amendment. And I just think absolutely spot on, because that wasn't the actions of a politician yesterday. That was the actions of a dictator and a despot. And that if America really, and it does, whether it is or it isn't, it prides itself on being on this beacon of democratic hope and liberty for the rest of the world. Now, the next thing they need to do is actually invoke those parts of the Constitution that protects its democracy. And I think that is either removing Trump or at least calling for an impeachment on him.
Yeah, I suppose the argument, I'll bring Laura in a second, is that I think listening to the incredible BBC Americast, which any of you don't listen to, I recommend you do. It's very good with John Soper and Emily Maitlis. Is that there just won't be time. I don't think there's enough time to be able to do either impeachment or the 25th. But what do we take for granted, Laura, that these things can't happen in Britain? That what happened in America? Do we is it? I mean, Alistair Carmichael put a fantastic quote on Twitter last night saying, if we think that we can't happen, we're probably fooling ourselves because we forget normals very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, an MP was murdered, another MP was, you know, there was a plot against another MP that was only narrowly thwarted by the police. But also, remember when the government just decided to suspend Parliament over Brexit last year? No, not last year, sorry, the year before.
Yeah.
You know, I think we have to be very aware that it can happen anywhere. It can happen absolutely anywhere, and you have to be alert to it, and you have to sort of nip it early. Otherwise it takes hold. And I think for me, the most striking thing yesterday, actually, I mean, well, there were so many. It was just such a horrifying night and such a horrifying thing to watch. But there were kind of a few things, which was, you know, including the kind of the lack of real policing. I mean, just it's astonishing that they were able to get into the building. And when you think about the kind of level of mobilization for the Black Lives Matter protests earlier in the summer, the fact that the police basically let them in and then let them out again, it's just, I mean, you have to think, what were they thinking? And I think there have to be a lot of questions asked about who was making those decisions and what was in their mind when they were making them, because this was not something that was kind of quietly planned. You know, this was something that they were planning out in the open on social media. But I think the other thing that I found quite striking was the reaction of sort of some of the Republicans, like Mike Pence and like Mitch McConnell, as the sort of, they sort of tried to ride this tiger through the Trump years, and it finally turned on them. And, you know, there were sort of a few moments where you could see them almost starting to realize what they'd done. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, tiny violin bleeds for you, but actually those are the people that carry a lot of the blame for it. You know, it's not just the demagogues whipping up hatred and whipping up division, whipping up violence. It's also the people who, you know, the respectable politicians who give it that respectable face, who allow it to get to that point. And I think those are the ones that we really need to be watching out for.
Lisa, what do you think the outcome of this will be? Do you think, because normally once a party secures a presidency, you know, they generally have a bit of a rough time, in midterms and stuff. Will the consequences of this be actually the Democrats keep enthused to the fact that, because classic example is what happened with Obama, stormed to victory and then lost the House and the Senate 2 years later. So what do you think the main outcome for this will be long term?
I think the outcome on the Republican Party will be really interesting, because for a while people were thinking that Trump's fundraising was not just to put in his own pocket, it was also to fund future running for election for himself or a family member, whichever family member is not in prison at the time. I think if you listen to some of the Republican commentators who've been in the media for the last 24 hours, that looks much harder for him to do now. And I think a lot of them who were trying to be on the coattails or were trying to ride the tiger have realised that that's not the right tiger to be riding. And so, I mean, Kelly Loeffler, who was one of the incumbent Georgia senators who lost, was going to contest the results of the Electoral College and then didn't in the end, and spoke about why. And I think it was almost that they realised, some of them have started to realise what they've done. Not all of them by any means, but some of them certainly have. And so I think the fact that this will have an impact on Trump's re-election hopes will actually help in some ways. It will help the Republican Party work out what on earth they're doing post-Trump, rather than having to work out, well, what do we do with him still around in quite the same way, doing quite the same thing. So I think that will have an impact. For the Democrats, I think, look, midterm elections, like for us, local elections in the middle of a parliament, voters rarely reward the government for what it's doing at the moment. And I think it's the same across both sides of the Atlantic. So who knows what's going to happen in 2 years' time. But I am keen to see, just referencing our earlier discussion about the empress of all campaigners, Stacey Abrams, Texas is next, some of them are saying, and so they're moving, the work that they've done, they've got good base now in Georgia, they're moving to Texas and they're going to look at that. So who knows?
I think it was the kind of response from those Republicans was really interesting. And it reminded me of like the 1980s RICO trials, where you had all these kind of mafia types, they're all living the life. And then suddenly it's like, oh no, it wasn't me, it was Fat Tony. It's not me, and that's exactly what happened yesterday, with all these. I even saw, Kellyanne Conway was tweeting, oh, this is a disgrace. It's like, you've been the mouthpiece for this. This is all because of the stuff that you've been doing. And which kind of goes back to the original point that I was really badly trying to make, is that Trump, they're not politicians, they're gangsters. And this whole thing has been a racket. And it's been a racket to kind of give wealth and give money to Trump's friends and his family. It's even run, it's run like a family business, like the mafia, isn't it? And I think yesterday was the beginning of probably, and hopefully for American democracy, maybe there is going to be a period of RICO trials, but with a completely different mafia family in the crosshairs.
So I think with that, we'll leave it. It is a watch this space, really, because I'm really interested, like say, how the Republican Party deal with the kind of, it's almost like the Tea Party's back, because the Tea Party disappeared when Trump won, and that split in the Conservative vote in America was very large. Now I wonder if not being in power gives you a united enemy as an opposition. Our enemy, regardless of the differences between we might have in our side, you've got the Democrats there to fight. So we will watch this space. But coming back home is what's happening in the UK, because actually it's been a pretty grim week in the UK. We'll start off with the most serious part, which of course is COVID and the acceleration of the new variant, the colossal amount of deaths that are now happening on a daily basis. And it's very easy to ignore these numbers. But I remember April when we topped 1,000 deaths a day, and we are there again. And we have less capacity in our hospitals, and this virus is completely out of control. So, I'll come to you first, Laura. Your husband is a doctor working on the front line. What are they feeling right now?
I think in Sheffield, it hasn't hit us with the same force that it has in London and in other parts of the country yet. So I think it's a kind of, almost a little bit of a calm before the storm, knowing that it's coming. Only sort of with the storm having been kind of raging at a slightly lower level for the last few months. I think there's just so much that we don't know about this new variant, which makes it quite frightening, in that sort of a lot of the things that we knew about how the virus was transmitted, we don't know how much of that holds for the new variant. The new variant, we know it's much more transmissible, but we don't know exactly why, which makes it quite difficult to sort of manage your risk on an individual level and also on a national level. And I have to say, I fear that the lockdown that we've ended up in, may not even be enough to bring it under control. We've still got quite large numbers of workplaces open. We've still got, numbers of people traveling sort of have not dropped to the level that they dropped to in March and April. And so you think with a more transmissible variant, plus more people will be doing things inside, is it going to be enough to bring it under control? And I have to say, I'm furious about it as well. The situation that we've ended up in with sort of children in schools being sent in for one day to mingle and spread the virus and then sent out again, just absolutely catastrophic decision making. But, also, if we were serious about getting children back to school as quickly as possible, then we need to be locking down everyone else harder. And I think we need to be, we as a party should be calling for that. I think Labour should be calling for that, and the government should be doing it. Is actually, we need to get children back to school as quickly as possible. And that will mean that life has to get that little bit more unpleasant for everyone else as well. But it really is something that that if we are serious about prioritising it, which I think we should, then we have to be making the difficult decisions that make that possible.
And this government never wants to make a difficult decision ever, does it, Lisa?
No, and one of the reasons why we are where we are when you compare the UK with the rest of the world is the delay, the dither and delay that just leads to late decision making, where you have to do the thing that sensible people have been calling for weeks, if not months in some cases, and any lockdowns have to be for longer. So it just, every time, the pattern just seems to be repeated every single time. And every time the Prime Minister speaks, it's about how he feels about what's going on and how he didn't want to have to do this, and how it's a very difficult thing for him. And alas, he has to do that. It's not about you, chump. It's about the country and the suffering that is going on. I mean, Laura talked about the health elements of the crisis. My inbox as a counsellor has got people in who can't feed their kids at the moment because they can't go to work. And it's that the number of people who are writing to me on that basis is increasing. The number of people who have a business that can't open and for whatever reason they're one of the excluded, or for some other reason aren't eligible for the government support. This is having much more wide-ranging impact than it needed to have, because the decisions were taken so late after such dither and delay, and it is appalling and a disgrace.
Does anything kind of simplify? Does anything kind of show this better than actually we've only just started doing proper testing at airports now? And there was a very funny thing. If any of you follow Have I Got News For You, their social media stuff is very funny, and it says that Britain is commemorating the proper testing at airports after 6 months after the rest of the world already did it. We are so far behind, and it's things like that, Tom, which get me, they do get me angry, because to put this in some sort of scale, we have had now more COVID deaths than British civilians died in World War II. That's where we're at as a country, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon.
Yeah. Ironically, Matt Hancock the other day on radio said that he is not going to apologise for acting quickly. I was like, well, of course you're not, because you haven't. So you don't need to apologise. If only. Yeah. It is the utter incompetence of it, and the airport stat you just gave there. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? Where everyone else's airports are kind of shutting down or doing tests, and what was the reason for not doing it? I don't get what is the reason, what is the rationale behind that? The schools fiasco that happened this week. We had it 24 hours. We had a day where, so I'm chair of governors of a local primary school, and I spent the day on Monday working out, first of all, with the head teacher, working out how we were going to communicate to the parents that the schools were still open, but some of the teachers were not coming in. So we had to figure out what could they legally do, what was their commitment. So we kind of worked our way through, and then we were trying to work out how to split certain classes, because we wouldn't have enough teachers to cover the usual classes, all this kind of stuff, when actually, and then 8 o'clock at night, Boris Johnson announces that the schools are going to be shut. And then I got a text message about 9 o'clock from the head teacher saying, can we have a chat, because everything we planned today has just been a waste of time, and I now need to work until 2 o'clock in the morning planning what is going to happen for the rest of the week. And it's just, you know what, and I don't want to sound like a member of Momentum here, but I'm going to. The decisions that are being made are representative of someone who is making those decisions that has no real life experience, and they have no idea about how, quote unquote, normal people live. And this is a guy who is running the country, who has just been given, he's never wanted for anything. He's never had to, as far as I'm aware, he's never had to fight for anything. And he's never had to kind of live a normal life. And he has no concept of what it means to work out a class plan. He has no concept of what it means to have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and get to work in a potentially unsafe environment. this man has no concept of what it is like for this country and the people living in this country. And this is all the decisions that they're making is exactly because of that.
And I'm glad you said there at the end, because this isn't about Boris Johnson. This is about a cabinet of utter useless human beings. Generally. And Gavin Williamson, how he is still in a job is beyond parody. I mean, and a little bit from my thing. So I have a primary school in my patch as a county councillor that can't even open its facilities for key workers. It just does not have staff available at the moment. And so I've got lots of parents who are key workers who have no idea where they're supposed to send their kids. Now, there are supposed to be hub schools, but Lancashire County Council has no way of compelling them to do it or to take kids from other schools. So it is such a mess. And I can't remember which one of you said it, but there will be, I think it was Lisa actually said, there will be people really worried about their income and how are they supposed to cope with childcare? Not to mention the whole thing of actually the schooling part of it. You know, how, you know, we have people with multiple kids with multiple age groups needing multiple levels of learning. And then you talk about stuff like the laptops and the Wi-Fi routers still not being available to some of our most vulnerable kids. It is so bad. And then finally they get to a decision where they're now going to not have exams, and Northern Ireland has followed suit since as well. But I was at an education scrutiny meeting in October saying if they have to make a decision, they have to make it sooner rather than later, because we've talked about lots of teachers who are parts of Lib Dems, teachers in my group saying, you know, we haven't had time to assess these children this year because it's been so disruptive. How can we make a proper assessment of these kids? So, Laura, what do we do about the education system? Is this year, because these kids only have one shot at education, what do we say to these kids?
I mean, it is really hard, and there aren't any good answers. I think, you know, to start with, you know, just to kind of pick up on what Tom said, it's you know, it's not about, you know, knowing this stuff yourself. It's about acknowledging that it's difficult and important, and therefore you should probably ask someone who does. Like, I don't know how to do a lesson plan either because I'm not a teacher, but I know that it's probably difficult. That's why teachers like train to do it. And so, you know, if I needed to figure out how to do that, I would go and ask some teachers. So, you know, I think, you know, we have lots of teachers who will have views on this, ideas. You know, other people who've been working in the education sector will have ideas. And figure out what's the least bad thing that we can do. And I mean, there aren't any good outcomes. I mean, I do think cancelling exams was the right approach. We've already had sort of schooling disrupted sort of much more in some areas than in others, and sort of there's just no way to kind of make it equitable. So I don't think there's a kind of another way to do it. So, okay, with the time we have left, what are the options? You know, can we look at doing some assessed coursework? Can we, you know, combine that with the sort of teacher assessed grades to create, you know, some kind of hybrid? You know, what can we do? You know, do we even need GCSEs actually is a you know, another question actually. You know, things like GCSE English and maths is really important, especially if you're leaving school at that point. But actually, if you're carrying on till sixth form, you know, do we need GCSEs, or can it be pass fail? You know, I don't know any of these things because I'm not an education expert. But actually, what we need to be doing is asking some education experts what they think. I don't know, maybe we should do a podcast on it and see if we can. I mean, I feel bad asking teachers to give up even more of their time, but perhaps we should try and find some who
maybe some retired teachers. The Liberal Democrats, certainly the Hazelgrave Liberal Democrats, have a range from which we could choose. I think retired teachers.
Well, in fact, we discussed that in our Unsung Heroes episode, that right. The entire world is run on a glue of retired teachers. So yeah, perhaps we should get some of them on.
I think it's important to say, just on the education side of things, that clarity was possible earlier, yet again. I mean, we saw Kirsty Williams as the Welsh Education Minister giving clarity to young people much earlier than in England. I think it being a devolved issue has enabled us to see differences of where people have got things right or they've got things right earlier. And I think that really, really makes a difference. It's important also, I think, to mention the BBC offering televised lessons for primary school on CBeebies and secondary school, I think BBC Two. And I think that it's just lots of people have a telly who don't necessarily have a laptop for each of their children. And I think just widening that gap for those kids who don't have multiple devices and don't have super fast broadband, or don't have parents who can help them with their homework for all sorts of really, really valid reasons, this being put on the telly and therefore making it more accessible is a very good thing. And I think it's exactly why we have a public service broadcaster, and it's a very useful thing for them to do and not unhelpful for BBC branding in terms of future funding cuts. So it's a very sensible and much welcomed move.
And I want to end the kind of bit on education, just on again, a slight positive. And I can't remember who it was on a previous podcast who says sometimes opportunity arises out of crises. And actually, I, for a long time, have thought the rigid end of year exam assessments are not right. I'm terrible at exams. I'm a relatively bright guy, but awful at exams. And actually, there are models across the world that do teacher assessment and have done it well for a very long time. And actually, is this an opportunity to say, well, actually, we know that it works. There are other ways we could go forward with our education going into the future. So I hope the lessons can be learned, and we might even get a better education system because of it. But then we have to go on to a little bit about vaccines, because we talked in our review of the year about they cannot get this vaccine rollout wrong. They've had so long to get it right. And Lisa, you've mentioned it already. There's a trend with this government that it's not just they delay and they dither and they seem to be very slow on the uptake. They also overpromise. And we are seeing already that the vaccine rollout is behind schedule. 2 million a week or whatever they thought it was going to be. There's problems with supply. There's things like not allowing pharmacists who are trained to do flu jabs to not be able to give this vaccine. I don't understand. I honestly, it makes me angry and it makes me frustrated. And I think, why are these people in charge of our country? But I have absolutely no faith that this vaccine rollout is going to go in any sort of straightforward way. And I know, my wife works in the NHS as well. She's on the calls talking about how these vaccine rollouts need to go. We know there's going to be problems. Does anyone here think it's going to go well?
Well, it has to go. And I think some people have received the vaccine and more are getting it every day, which is a good thing. And it is one of the key things we all need to put our hope in for there being a brighter tomorrow. Couldn't agree with you more about using community pharmacies. I think they're trusted in the community. They're easy for people to get to. What we don't want at the moment is loads of people meeting in the same places. And so spreading it out is a good thing, and using the resources that we have. We know, I think it's core fundamental Lib Dem principles and values, that decisions being taken at a local level by the local community on issues that affect them are usually better decisions than centralising too much and trying to do command and control from the centre. While we're recording this, it's Thursday afternoon. I think there's a Boris Johnson press conference in a little while with Brigadier somebody or other from the army, because I think the army's taking over the logistics side of things, and one of the medical people. The NHS is great at loads of things. It's not a logistics operation. The army is really good at logistics. And so it seems very sensible to me to bring the army in and to help with that. One thing that I think we as a party have done well, so Munira's made the point already, our health and care spokesperson, about using community pharmacies. For me, the faster we vaccinate, the faster we get out of this. There are some people, and I'm going to include myself, I'd turn up at a 3:30 a.m. vaccination appointment. I don't know about you. Laura's going to be up with a new baby fairly soon, so he's going to be awake anyway at some time. I think we need to be doing 24/7 where we can and just getting through this as quickly as possible. I'm probably a bit further down the list than would need to worry about a vaccination appointment too soon. But, my dad, who is the next tranche, he'd rock up at 3:30 if it meant he could, not worry as much about contracting coronavirus. I think we need to look at this in a different way, and I think 24/7 vaccinations is one of those ways.
Anyone else want to come in on vaccinations before we move on?
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree on that last point, to be honest. Like, I mean, I think let's see where we get to, but at the moment the blockage is supply. And the reason that we haven't been able to scale up more is that they're struggling with the logistics of getting enough of the vaccine to GPs, and I think I saw it in the Guardian this morning that they've now announced that pharmacies will be able to use the Oxford vaccine. So I don't know, for me, I think it, sorting out those supply issues and then seeing where we are, if we then end up in a blockage of trained vaccinators or of physical space, but actually at the moment, the blockage is getting enough of the vaccines to the organizations that can do the vaccination. And I think we do need to bear in mind that this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, and kind of consider that in how we plan it out. And I think there was a bit of kind of controversy over the weekend about, or during the week, I've lost track of time, about sort of whether the vaccine would be delivered on Sundays or not. And the answer is no, unless the group that's vaccinating is about to run out, which actually seems to me completely reasonable, because actually trying to pace it, we want to do it quickly, but we also need to pace it in a way that bears in mind that there are, these are humans that are doing it. And as soon as you start to try and do things too quickly, we're going to end up with people burning out and making silly mistakes, and that's not what we want either. So I think it has to be a balance between how do we do it as quickly as possible, identifying what the blockages are, and then trying to troubleshoot those blockages as they come up. And I mean, so far, I think, to be fair, the UK has been one of the more successful countries in the world at vaccinating. Now, I fully expect the government to mess it up at some point in the next few weeks or months. And to be honest, the fact that it is going better than it is in other places, I actually find deeply worrying, because it makes me feel that whatever mistake they come up with is going to have to be sort of proportionately terrible to compensate for a decent early start. But actually, we successfully vaccinate in the space of a couple of months every year millions of people against the flu. We actually can do this. We just need to not mess it up, and perhaps also think about not overcomplicating it as well, because actually we have a system that enables us to do this. It's a huge amount of work for GPs and pharmacies. So actually, again, go to the GPs and pharmacies. What do you guys need to enable you to scale this up? And then try and do that, and try and resist the temptation to set up an over-centralized big system like track and trace that gets around the kind of local systems that we know work in favor of something central that might not.
Tom, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say the kind of the thing that I'm worried about, if I'm honest, is the communications around it all yet again, and that's where the government has consistently failed throughout the whole of the pandemic. And I mean, I've already had people emailing me, constituents emailing me, asking, what tranche they're in, why, when can they expect someone to contact them. One person contacted me saying, I had a letter from the NHS saying that I am eligible for a vaccine, but I haven't heard anything since. And I think that's when the problems start, is when people aren't given information in a way that they can take it and understand. And my kind of deep worry on this is that the NHS professionals are going to get the blame when things start going wrong, just like the teachers. The government tried to blame the teachers when in the crisis last week. So I'm very, very worried about how the government are positioning this already. So if there is a mistake, it's not going to land on Nadine Zawari's lap, is it? It's going to land on the NHS's. So I think that's something that we need to be very, very aware of.
Just something else to highlight as well. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but Daisy Cooper, the education spokesperson, was calling yesterday for teachers to be moved up the priority list in order to facilitate getting children back to school, which I have to say I think is something that we should be. I mean, I'm very glad that she's calling for that, and I think it's the right thing to do. If we are prioritizing education, actually keeping teachers safe is a reasonable and fair thing to do. And also, let's bear in mind there's about 1 million teachers in the UK, or front-facing school staff in the UK. If the government meets their 2 million a week target, let's just say if, actually that's only half a week of vaccination efforts. So actually, for the sake of delaying, would we want to delay highly vulnerable people for a month? Well, no, probably not. But for the sake of delaying, somebody's vaccine for sort of 2 or 3 days potentially in order to get children back to school, potentially a month or 2 months early, to me that seems, okay, you need to kind of get some experts to model this stuff, but to me that seems like a decent trade, and it feels like the right thing to do. So I'm very glad that the party's calling for it.
And we'll find out which teachers are anti-vaxxers, which will be a whole other thing that we'll have to deal with.
As long as it's not the biology or chemistry teachers.
Or history, hopefully. There's but we'll move on to something that's come up, which is obviously because we're Lib Dems, and we've, for a long time, obviously, we haven't had any elections. And so there's a lot of debate going on in Lib Dem groups about whether May's elections will take place. Now, within the space of 24 hours, I got told, absolutely, they definitely will, to, maybe not. So at the moment, I suppose, Lisa, we might as well come to you first regarding this. Local parties, regardless of what happens, should just keep campaigning. Well,
so the government, via the Cabinet Office this week, has told, I think it was council leaders, but has told people that the elections are happening in May. There was a Prime Minister's question, and the Prime Minister said, well, that's what the law allows for, but we're keeping it under review. And as we've already said, on Sunday, people should send their schools. On Monday, people should absolutely not send their children to school. So these things can change. However, the guidance that's currently coming from government is absolutely elections will go ahead in May. What has happened is there's been a bit of press coverage this week saying council leaders have been asked their opinion, and we think this is parties, not the Liberal Democrats, who are trying to build a groundswell of opinion that they should move, and there might be some political parties for whom moving the elections would be electorally advantageous, and so some of this stirring is coming from them. It's not coming from the Lib Dems. So we don't know whether they'll get their way. What we do know is until it is officially coming from the government that the elections are not happening, we need to continue campaigning, because the only way Lib Dems win elections is to fight elections. We don't just wait. We don't win by accident usually. So we have to keep campaigning. Now, what does that mean in practice? Door knocking isn't the right thing for a national lockdown, so don't do that. Delivery, the advice on delivery is being worked on. We've sought a legal advice, and we're looking at what the current guidance says. I'm not a lawyer, but looking at it, it says that work and volunteering are permitted reasons to leave the house. For me, as an elected member, I feel it's a vital part of my role to communicate with the residents I represent. And so putting appropriate information, things like how to get help during coronavirus, other useful local numbers. We talked about mental health before, so the numbers for the Samaritans or Mind or whoever, I think would be really useful and a key part of my role. But we'll wait and see until we've got the final guidance on that. And there's loads of campaigning that you can do, absolutely nothing to do with leaving the house. There's some really good emails you can send. There's some telephone campaigning, which I don't know how many others have done it, but the people I've phoned are absolutely delighted to have a chat, really. There's not a lot of social interaction going on at the moment, and they're really nice phone calls. So we have to, in our minds, we have to operate as though the elections are definitely happening, to your question, John, about whether they are or not. Mischievous buggers from other parties might prefer it if they weren't to happen. And I get people who are thinking, well, a count in the town hall, normally quite a cramped affair if you're overseeing the counting of votes. You would stand very close to other people, and how that could work is not clear. So I get that there are some really sensible questions. At the moment, the government is saying elections will happen, and so we have to continue as though they will happen.
And I think one thing that came up, Tom, before I bring you in, is that if we're in some sort of lockdown measures until mid-March, one thing that is being raised is how we go about getting nomination signatures. For those people that don't know or are listening, that Lib Dems, well, all parties, beg your pardon, have to find 10 signatures to be able to stand as a candidate. Now, there's been all sorts of rumours that might go down to 2, that or whatever. But if the things out till, if we're in restrictions till mid-March, the third week of March, you basically start getting your signatures. So this is going to be very tight on the government's timetable if elections go ahead. So that's the first point, Tom. The second point is your opinion on, is it advantageous or not? I'm just going to take up for Lisa's point here, because she's absolutely right. Lib Dems win by campaigning. We don't have a core block of votes. The people that will benefit most by no campaigning is probably like the Tories. They have a block vote that they can rely on generally, and we get ours by just outfighting them. So would a delay not help the Lib Dems in terms of we would have more time to campaign before the elections actually took place?
Okay, so in terms of the your point about the nominations, I think it's quite an interesting thing there, but it is the one job that I dodge out of every time is getting in our local party. So I'm not best placed to comment
Thomas,
on that.
Outrageous.
I'm not best placed to comment on that. In terms of advantageous, I'm with Lisa massively on this. This would be surprised that I agree with Lisa Smart. Shocker that you've got to play to the whistle, right? So to give you a bit of a story, when I was at school, our football coach was Mr. Vale, and he was a top guy. And he used to have this really, the one thing that we used to wind him up was if we stopped the play and say, well, that was offside, or, that was a foul. And you go, did you hear the whistle? Did you hear the whistle? No, keep on playing. And they got to a point where if we didn't play to the whistle, then he would make us do laps and laps and laps until he blew the whistle. So my message to all the Liberal Democrats is play to the whistle until the date is changed, until the elections are cancelled. The elections are happening on the first Thursday in May, and you've just got to keep on going. And it doesn't matter. Sorry to not answer your question, John, but it doesn't matter if it's advantageous or not to us. The most advantageous thing that we can do is campaign now. And start using Facebook, using emails, when we're allowed to use letters, telephone canvassing. Telephone canvassing is going to be the big thing that we should be doing between now and May. And the way we make it advantageous is just battering the Tories when we're allowed to kind of be a bit more political. It's just batter the Tories, because the last year is completely on them, and we need to be reminding every voter, every member of our constituencies, of our wards, every resident, we need to be reminding them that the problems that we have faced could have been avoided if it were not for these Conservatives.
And I'll bring Laura to finish off this point because she'll be Labour facing, but just a little prod to anyone that we have done several episodes of the podcast. Particularly, there's a really good one about campaigning without canvassing, which had Simon Lepori and Chris Lovell-Morgan in it. And that's one you should really watch if you're thinking, okay, what can I do? I'm so used to campaigning. How can we do it? Go watch that. It's all still on Facebook. It's on YouTube. It's on as a podcast, so you can check out that. It's from a few months ago. Laura.
To be honest, I don't have very much to add to that from a kind of campaigning perspective. I think on a personal level, I'm just a little bit disappointed because I was quite excited that having a baby in mid to late March might mean that I didn't have to do polling day for like the first time in my entire life. I'm going to get to have polling day off, but if polling day moves, then I won't have an excuse. I think. Even
start them early, Laura. There's none of this. You have your first one off.
I have to say,
even Liberal Democrats acknowledge that if you're still not allowed to drive after having a baby, then perhaps you don't have to deliver leaflets. But if the election's moved, I'll have no such excuse. So I'm going to have to do polling day. So I'm going to. But it'll be nice to, the baby can have baby's first polling day is always an important milestone. It'll be nice to be able to celebrate with so many
Lib Dem Image should have a range of baby grows, I think, that say exactly that kind of thing. Baby's first polling day, baby's first.
I keep suggesting it to the young Liberals. If there's any young Liberals listening to this, new parents are absolute suckers. You could definitely get some of those made and get, make a real profit on it. So, very young liberal, baby's first polling day, all of these things, you could definitely make some money out of people like me that will part with our money for anything cute. So yeah, definitely think about it.
We're going to end this podcast on honestly, this is a very disappointing note for me and Lisa, that we've had someone who dodges getting nominations and then someone who's trying to get out of polling day duty. What did you learn? Nothing from Stacey Abrams? We've just been talking about the virtues of campaigning, but no, if it's a bit awkward, but thank you so much, all of you, for being on. Loads of stuff to talk about. Thank you everyone for listening as well. Do comment below. Anything you want to mention to us, any questions you want to ask, do let us know. Do you think the government's going to get the vaccine rollout right? Do you think this is a turning point for the Republicans in America? Let us know. Comment. Also, make sure you like and subscribe. Do follow all these guys on their social media. I'll put it in the show notes so you can follow them on a daily basis, their comings and goings and pothole pointing or whatever we do in the Lib Dems, because you know what, we can still do certain things even though during lockdown. But thank you so much for watching. Do follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at Lib Dem Pod. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Do stay safe, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.